You were the smart one. Everyone told you that. Teachers noticed you. Parents bragged about you. Friends came to you when they didn't understand something. You got good grades. You picked things up quickly. And for a long time, it worked. It worked so well that you started to believe it was who you were. And then, somewhere between childhood and adulthood, everything changed. Now, you wake up and feel stuck, unmotivated, disconnected. You know you're still smart, but life feels flat. You struggle to start things. You lose steam halfway through. You feel socially out of sync, like life is happening around you and you're just watching from a distance. And the worst part? You don't know why. On paper, everything still looks fine. You're capable. You're functional. You might even be successful. But inside, there's this quiet, relentless question echoing in your mind. What happened to me? And here's the brutal truth no one talks about. Being the smart kid came with a hidden cost. A cost most people only discover when it's already shaped their entire adult identity. You see, when you're young, identity is simple. You latch onto a few labels. You like drawing or dinosaurs or Pokemon. But when someone tells you you're smart and keeps telling you, that label becomes something else. It becomes a standard, a role to play, a mask you're afraid to take off. And at first, it's a high. Being smart gives you attention. Validation. You get praised not for trying hard, but for not needing to try at all. For solving problems fast. For never struggling. And that's the trap. You don't realize it at the time, but this praise teaches you something toxic. If I'm really smart, things should always be easy. Let that sink in. Because once you believe that, everything that isn't easy starts to feel like a threat, like failure, like a crack in the foundation of who you are. And so you start avoiding struggle. You don't raise your hand unless you're 100% sure. You don't try new things unless you know you'll be good at them. You don't ask questions. You don't risk looking like you don't know. And bit by bit, your world gets smaller. You stop learning. You stop growing. You stop connecting. Because all of those things require one thing you've trained yourself to fear: vulnerability. You built your identity on being exceptional. But now that identity is holding you hostage. Because if you fail, it doesn't feel like a normal setback. It feels like a personal collapse. And that's how you go from being the standout kid to the emotionally paralyzed adult. Smart enough to recognize the problem, but too scared to do anything that might prove you're not as smart as you were told. But here's the good news. This isn't who you are. It's just a strategy, a defense, a story you've outgrown. And in this video, we're going to break it down, piece by piece, so you can understand how you got here, and more importantly, how to get out. Because this isn't a story about failure. It's a story about survival. And once you understand the patterns that shaped you, you can start building something completely different, something real. Coming up, why effort feels like danger, and how to rewire the belief that keeps you stuck. When you were praised for being smart, no one ever meant to hurt you. In fact, they probably thought they were helping. And in a way, they were. But they weren't praising your curiosity, or your persistence, or your ability to grow. They were praising your effortless success. You got an A without studying? Amazing. You solved the problem before the others finished reading it? Genius. You breezed through the homework? Clearly gifted. But here's what you were never told. That struggle is part of learning. That discomfort is part of growth. That being wrong is part of getting better. And so you learned something dangerous. Not consciously, but deeply. If I'm really smart, I shouldn't need to try. So when something does require effort, your first instinct isn't to lean in, it's to panic. Because now the stakes are different. This isn't just about passing a test or finishing a project. This is about who you are. And suddenly, effort doesn't feel like progress. It feels like proof that you're an imposter, that maybe you've been fooling everyone, including yourself. That's why you procrastinate. That's why you avoid starting. Because starting means struggling. And struggling means facing a fear you've been running from for years. What if I'm not actually smart? So instead, you wait. You stall. You stay in your comfort zone, where you're safe, but shrinking. And here's the cruel irony. While you're protecting your identity, everyone else is out there failing forward. They try things. They mess up. They look dumb. They get back up. And through all of that, they grow. But you're stuck. Because your growth is tied to being flawless. And growth never happens in perfection. So what started as a gift, your intelligence, slowly becomes a prison. And the bars are built from one silent, invisible belief. If I try and fail, it means I'm not enough. That belief becomes your compass. It guides your decisions. You stop signing up for things. You avoid new environments. You sit at the edge of the group. You stay in the classroom of life, but you stop raising your hand. And eventually, you don't even realize it's fear. You just call it not my thing. You say, that's not really me. But the truth is, it might have been, if you'd ever let yourself try. And that's the problem. You're not avoiding failure. You're avoiding what failure represents. But here's something you need to hear. You are allowed to fail. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to be average at something. You are allowed to look awkward, to be new, to struggle publicly. Because none of those things make you less. They make you real. And when you give yourself permission to be real, you unlock the one thing you've been craving this whole time, but haven't been able to find: freedom. Coming up next, why being the smart one often leads to loneliness, and how we replace connection with control. Let's talk about loneliness. Not the kind you feel when you're alone on a Friday night, but the kind you feel when you're in a room full of people and still feel like no one sees you. For a lot of smart kids, that loneliness doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from years of living in your head instead of your life. Here's how it starts. When you build your identity on being smart, you naturally lean into the things that reinforce that. Books, ideas, thinking, planning, observing. That becomes your safe space. That becomes where you feel in control. But the trade-off? You start stepping out of the social current. You stop doing things just for fun. Because what if you're bad at them? You don't join clubs. You avoid team sports. You skip group projects. Because those are messy, unpredictable, exposing. So while other people are bonding over awkward moments, shared struggles, and collective effort, you're opting out. Not because you don't want connection, but because you're afraid it might cost you your image. And here's where things get twisted. You still crave closeness. You still want to belong. So what do? You try to analyze your way into relationships. You study people. You observe their patterns. You build emotional simulations in your head. You develop something called cognitive empathy. The ability to understand what others feel without feeling it with them. And it works, up to a point. You can navigate conversations. You can appear confident. You might even seem charismatic. But underneath, you're exhausted. Because you're not with people. You're managing them. You're tracking everything: what to say, how they might react, whether you're sounding smart enough, funny enough, interesting enough. And so every interaction becomes a test. Every moment becomes performance. And eventually, you start avoiding even the things you want, just to avoid failing at them. This is when the loneliness gets louder. Because now it's not just about connection. It's about survival. You don't want to be vulnerable. You don't want to be seen struggling. You don't want anyone to know that behind all the overthinking is someone who feels completely lost. And when the loneliness starts to hurt too much, your brain builds a final line of defense, a belief that shields you from the pain. I don't belong because I'm just different. You start telling yourself things like, people don't get me. I'm too deep for shallow friendships. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by fake people. But here's the truth. That's not confidence. That's defensive arrogance. It's not that you actually think you're better. It's that saying you're above everyone hurts less than admitting you feel left out. You've built a fortress, not of strength, but of fear. And even though a part of you desperately wants connection, that fortress won't let anyone in. Because connection requires humility. It requires presence. It requires letting yourself be seen, not for your mind, but for your messy, human, uncertain self. And until you step out from behind the performance, you'll keep wondering why no one truly sees you. Coming up next, how to let go of the smart identity and rebuild yourself from the inside out. Let's be honest. Letting go of the smart kid identity feels like death. It's not just giving up a label. It's giving up everything that once made you feel special, safe, seen. You were the one people pointed to, the one who always had the answer, the one who made things look easy. And now, you're scared to try. Not because you're lazy, not because you're broken, but because deep down, trying feels like risking the entire foundation of who you are. Because if I try and fail, what does that say about me? So you protect the image. You maintain the illusion. You stay in the lane you're already good at, even if that lane is killing your passion, your drive, your curiosity. But here's the truth. You're not that 10-year-old anymore. You're not a gifted child frozen in time. You're a grown person with the power to evolve, if you're willing to break the mold. The book doesn't end with insight. It begins with identity. And so does healing. The only way forward is to stop being the smart one. Not because intelligence is bad, but because basing your worth on it is toxic. Because as long as your value is tied to being clever, sharp, brilliant, or better, you'll avoid anything that threatens that image. And the result? You'll avoid life. So what do? You build a new identity. Not around being smart, but around being someone who grows. That shift is everything. You stop asking, what will make me look impressive? And start asking, what will help me grow? You stop chasing validation and start seeking transformation. You try things you might suck at. You show up awkward. You take risks. You ask dumb questions. You stop trying to win and start trying to live. And at first, it'll feel humiliating. It'll feel like you're going backward. It'll feel like you're failing. But that's not failure. That's the first sign that you're alive again. Because the old identity, the one that needed to be perfect, was slowly suffocating you. It kept you safe, yes, but it also kept you stuck. The new identity? It's messy. It's real. It's honest. And it's the only one that can actually carry you forward. You're not here to impress people. You're here to become whole. And wholeness isn't built on effortless success. It's built on resilience, on showing up again and again. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Coming up, the final step. How to connect again, not as a role to play, but as a human being finally ready to be seen. If you've made it this far, I want you to pause and breathe. Because this is the moment where everything starts to shift. For most of your life, you thought you had to earn your place. You thought your value came from being better. You thought connection required performance. That love came with conditions. That belonging was for those who impressed their way into it. But here's the truth. The truth no one told you as a child. You don't need to be brilliant to belong. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room to deserve space in it. You just need to show up. Fully. Honestly. Imperfectly. You need to let go of the need to be right and replace it with the courage to be real. Because the moment you stop clinging to the identity that kept you safe is the moment you finally come home to yourself. And you realize connection isn't earned. It's allowed. It happens in the awkward, in the uncertain, in the shared silence, in the late-night phone call, in the stupid group project, in the moment you admit, I don't know either. That's where people meet each other. Not in excellence, but in humanness. And yes, being smart is a gift. But it's not your whole story. Because beneath the analysis, beneath the mental gymnastics, beneath the armor of control, there's a version of you that just wants to be with people, to feel seen, to laugh without rehearsing the line, to try something without knowing how it ends, to ask for help, to not always have the answer. That version of you? That's the one people are waiting for. That's the one who gets invited in. That's the one who finally gets to stop observing life and start living it. So if this spoke to you, if something cracked open, even a little, then that's your sign. Let go of the pedestal. Step into the room. Let yourself belong, not because you earned it, but because you were finally willing to show up, exactly as you are. Subscribe to MindArchitect for more tools, strategies, and stories to help you take full control of your mind and your life. You're not just watching content anymore. You're becoming the architect. Let's go.